When we first moved into the house, the next-door neighbors felt ordinary. The kind of family you expect to live beside for years without thinking much about it. They had kids who ran loud through the yard, slammed doors, rode bikes too fast down the sidewalk. It was noisy sometimes, but it felt like life noise, not trouble. The parents kept things mostly under control. If something went wrong, it stopped quickly. The house next door felt contained. That changed after one of the parents died. It did not happen suddenly for us. There was no single moment where everything flipped. The house just began to unravel slowly, like a rope fraying strand by strand. The kids were home more. The remaining parent looked worn down, smaller somehow. The routines disappeared. Lights stayed on late. Music played longer. Doors slammed harder. First, the kids were just louder. Yelling in the driveway, fighting on the lawn, throwing things at each other. The sound carried into our house even with the windows closed. I started noticing tension in my body when I pulled into the driveway, the sense that home was no longer quiet ground. The first real incident came late one night. I noticed something wrong when I pulled the car in and felt the tires crunch in a way they never had before. The sound was sharp, wrong. I stopped and got out, heart pounding. A line of glass ran straight across the driveway, mixed with bent nails and metal scraps. It was laid out with intention, not scattered. The moonlight caught the edges and made them shine. I cleaned it up by hand, wearing gloves, checking the tires inch by inch. I told myself it was a prank. Kids being stupid. That thought helped me sleep. The graffiti came next. Spray paint across the side of the house facing theirs. Thick lines, sloppy letters, nothing clever. It smelled sharp and chemical even hours later. I scrubbed until my arms burned, but faint stains stayed behind, a ghost of what had been written. Then the window broke. It happened in the afternoon while we were home. A crash that sounded like a gunshot inside the room. Glass exploded inward, raining across the floor. A full can of ginger ale rolled to a stop near the couch. Still fizzing, sticky liquid spreading across the carpet. The smell of sugar and citrus filled the room, mixed with dust and broken glass. I stood there shaking, staring at the hole where the window had been, trying to understand how fast it happened, how close we had been to sitting there. After that, the house stopped feeling like shelter. Felt thin, exposed. More things followed. Dog shit smeared against the siding, thrown hard enough to splatter. Condoms filled with corn syrup and flour hitting the walls and bursting, leaving thick, pale streaks that dried into crusty trails. I found them in the mornings, sagging against the house like something alive had crawled there and died. Every weekend turned into chaos. Cars arrived at all hours. Music shook our walls. Bass thumped through the floor even in the back rooms. People crowded onto their porch, screaming at each other, laughing, swearing, voices raw and endless. Weekdays were not much better. The porch became a stage for constant noise. Obscenities shouted back and forth, arguments that went nowhere, laughter that felt sharp and empty. I started sleeping lightly. Every sound pulled me awake. A bang outside made my chest tighten. I checked the windows before bed. I checked the locks. I felt watched even when no one was there. Then the dealing started. I noticed the pattern before I fully understood it. Cars pulling up, stopping briefly, leaving. People approaching the house on foot, staying minutes, not hours. Exchanges on the porch. Quick glances up and down the street. The traffic increased, especially at night. The noise did not always come with parties anymore. Sometimes it was quiet, tense. We called the police when things hit us directly. Broken glass, property damage. The police already knew the kids. They came, took notes, looked tired. They walked next door and stayed a while. When they left, nothing changed. The kids stayed. The noise returned. The damage continued. The mother apologized privately afterward, every time. Her face looked hollow. Her words felt practiced. She promised it would stop. It never did. She shielded them when the police were there, downplayed everything, framed it as misunderstanding. The warnings stacked up and went nowhere. The worst part was the waiting, not knowing when the next thing would happen. hearing laughter next door and wondering if something was coming over the fence, finding new damage and realizing it had happened while we slept. The house began to feel like something we had to defend rather than live in. We talked about moving. The idea felt heavy. This was our home. We had worked for it. Leaving felt like giving something up that we should not have to. That was when we decided on the cameras. We did not do it quietly. We bought enough to cover every side of the house. Front, back, driveway, side yard. We spent days planning angles, checking coverage, making sure there were no blind spots. When installation day came, the kids were there, sitting on the porch, watching. We mounted the cameras one by one, visible and obvious. We adjusted them while standing in full view. We checked feeds on our phones, pointed to corners, shifted angles. We removed blind spots carefully, deliberately. There was no rush, no secrecy. The effect was immediate. The next weekend came and went quietly. No party, no screaming, no cars cycling through. The porch stayed empty more often than not. The dealing stopped. The traffic vanished. The house next door went dark earlier at night. Days passed, then weeks. No new graffiti, no objects thrown. No glass in the driveway. The tension in my chest slowly eased. Sleep came easier. The house felt solid again. There were a few exceptions. A shout here, a slammed door there, but nothing like before. The cameras stayed. The kids avoided our side of the yard entirely. The porch noise faded into background sound, then into nothing. The peace felt strange at first, like silence after ringing ears. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It never did. Looking back, the horror was not a single event. It was the slow erosion of safety. The way small acts of cruelty stacked up until home felt hostile. The way fear crept in through sound, through damage, through the knowledge that someone next door did not care what happened to us. The cameras did not fix the kids. They did not heal the family. They did not bring back the parent who died. They simply added consequences. They drew a line that could be proven. That was enough. Now, when I pull into the driveway, the tires roll smooth. The house is quiet again. The windows hold. The walls stay clean. The cameras watch without blinking, and the yard feels like ours. The threat did not disappear on its own. It backed away when it realized it could no longer hide. I moved into the small cul-de-sac on the edge of town in the spring of 2018. The houses were uniform, modest brick structures, all with narrow driveways and tiny patches of lawn. When I first arrived, the neighborhood had a quiet, almost sleepy feel. The sun hit the rooftops at a soft angle, and the few families who were outside moved deliberately, almost cautiously. My next-door neighbors at the time were a family with 2 kids, both under 10. They were lively, but never unmanageable. Occasional shouts, bikes left on the curb, a little squealing as they played tag in the yard. At first, it seemed normal. It wasn't the kind of noise that kept you up at night or left you tense when you walked past the house. Then, one late summer, the father passed away unexpectedly. The reason was never fully clear, though the whispers in the cul-de-sac suggested something sudden, a heart attack maybe. After that, everything changed. The mother tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the energy around their house shifted almost immediately. The children were different, angrier, louder, more unpredictable. It wasn't just the usual roughhousing. There was something sharp in their behavior, an edge that hadn't been there before. The first real sign came in the form of graffiti. I woke one morning to find the side of my house spray-painted. Simple words, crude scrawls, but unmistakable. The paint was black and wet, streaking down the siding. I felt a cold knot in my stomach as I traced the letters with my eyes. It wasn't a note, it wasn't a warning. It was just the unmistakable mark of deliberate malice. I didn't know who could have done it at first. The kids were small, I told myself, but the timing, the suddenness, it felt like a response to something. A week later, I noticed a line of nails and broken glass laid across my driveway, like someone had meticulously placed them there to make sure I would drive over them. It wasn't just reckless, it was intentional. I called the police, but there wasn't enough evidence to pursue anything. I started leaving my car parked on the street, even though it was less convenient because I didn't want to take the risk. Over the months, incidents continued. A can of ginger ale was thrown through my kitchen window one evening. The glass shattered everywhere, cutting the edge of the countertop and spraying shards across the floor. I remember standing in the middle of the mess, feeling the sticky soda on my bare feet, heart racing. I had no idea if it had been the kids or someone else, but the pattern was clear. Each act more daring than the last, more invasive. Dog feces appeared on my front porch next, not just once, but several times. I cleaned it immediately, trying not to let it bother me, but each time it appeared, it was in a different spot, almost as if the perpetrators were exploring my space, learning how to push me further. I started leaving notes taped to my door, polite warnings, but they disappeared within hours. The mailbox was smashed, the tires on my car slashed, and the garden hose cut. Every day felt like a new small battle, something meant to unsettle, to remind me I wasn't safe in my own home. The slowest, most draining part was the feeling of being watched. I would step outside to get the mail, and it was as if someone was waiting, hiding just beyond my line of sight. I saw shadows moving behind curtains, caught glimpses of small figures darting behind trees. My yard, which had once felt like a private space, felt violated. I stopped spending time outside, stopped leaving doors unlocked, started locking everything, even doors that normally didn't require it. The tension was constant, gnawing at me. I tried reasoning with the mother, a fragile, grieving woman, but there was no bridge to reach her. She would nod politely if I mentioned anything, but the chaos continued. She seemed exhausted, disconnected, incapable of controlling the children, or perhaps unwilling. I eventually realized she had no interest in policing the behavior, that the environment she allowed was going to continue indefinitely. The neighbors who had once smiled at me over fences were now wary, hesitant to intervene, and the sense of isolation grew. The pattern escalated until one night, I woke to a noise outside my window. A rock, heavy and jagged, smashed through the glass near my bed. I jumped back, heart pounding. The window frame splintered, shards of glass scattered across the carpet. That was when I called the police again, insisting on a formal report, even though I doubted anything would come of it. They came, took photos, wrote down statements, but there was no one to arrest. No one saw anything. I realized then that this wasn't going to stop unless I acted. I began documenting everything, dates, times, what had been done. I took photos, saved fragments of spray paint and broken glass. I installed cameras around the property, subtle ones that I could monitor from my phone. The first week they were up, I caught the children in the act. Two small figures, careful and deliberate, moving across the driveway, breaking the mailbox, tossing objects against the siding. I watched them, frozen, a mixture of anger and disbelief in my chest. They were young, but it was clear this had become a game to them, a source of power. Armed with evidence, I confronted the situation legally. I contacted Child Services and the police together, presenting what I had documented. The case was complicated because they were minors, and the mother still lived there, barely managing her own life. It took months, formal meetings, and pressure from multiple sides, but eventually, the children were moved into temporary foster care. The change was immediate. The air around their house shifted again, quieter this time, almost too quiet. The lingering tension in my own yard slowly eased. The fear that had become constant loosened its grip. In the aftermath, I repaired the damage to my home. I replaced windows, painted over graffiti, and re-landscaped the driveway. The scars remained in memory, but the physical reminders faded. The neighborhood returned to its sleepy rhythm, the quiet coming not from absence but from relief. I could sit outside again without feeling watched, hear the occasional laughter of children across the street without flinching. I never resented the kids personally. They were products of tragedy and neglect, but the months of chaos had left a permanent mark on me, a reminder of how fragile the sense of safety can be in a place that once felt secure. The experience taught me to pay attention to the small signs, the shifts in energy, the way grief can ripple outward and touch everyone nearby. I also learned the value of documenting, of acting decisively, and of understanding that sometimes restoring order requires intervention beyond polite neighborly requests. My life moved forward, slowly returning to normal, but I carry the memory of those months clearly, a detailed record in my mind of tension, fear, and ultimately, resolution. It was horrifying, real, and entirely human. A neighbor horror not of monsters, but of loss, neglect, and the dangerous ways children can react when left untended. I moved into my first apartment because it was cheap, close to work, and empty. The building was old but solid, brick walls painted too many times, narrow stairs worn smooth at the edges. It smelled like dust and old cooking oil. I told myself that was normal. I told myself a lot of things back then. I lived on the ground floor directly under another unit. I knew there were people above me because I heard footsteps at night and water running through the pipes. I never learned their names. I never saw their faces clearly. They kept to themselves, and I was fine with that. I worked long shifts and came home tired. All I wanted was quiet and a place to sleep. The first roach I saw was in the kitchen sink. It was early summer. I had just finished washing dishes and turned away to dry my hands. When I looked back, it was there, pressed flat against the porcelain near the drain, dark and shiny like it had been oiled. I froze for a second, then knocked it into the drain with the sponge and ran hot water until I felt sick from staring at the hole. I cleaned the kitchen that night until my hands cracked. I wiped every surface, pulled out the stove, scrubbed behind the fridge. I took the trash out twice. I went to bed telling myself it came in through an open window or hitched a ride in a grocery bag. The next one showed up 2 days later. This time it crawled out from under the microwave while I was standing there. It moved fast like it knew the layout already. I killed it with a shoe and stood there breathing hard, heart racing in a way that felt stupid for something so small. Within a week, they were impossible to ignore. They came out after dark at first. One on the counter, one along the baseboard, one in the bathroom, perched on the edge of the tub like it owned the place. I started sleeping with the light on in the kitchen so I could see what moved when I got up for water. When I flipped the switch, they scattered into cracks I did not know existed. I called the building manager. He sent someone to spray my unit. The man wore gloves and a mask and told me to keep things clean. I nodded even though I already did. The smell of chemicals lingered for days, sharp and sweet, burning my throat. It did not matter. The roaches kept coming. They got bolder. I found them during the day, slow and swollen, crawling across the floor like they were tired of hiding. One fell from the ceiling vent onto the counter while I was making coffee. I dropped the mug and it shattered, hot liquid soaking into the floor while the roach disappeared under the cabinet. I sealed everything I could. I bought traps, gel, powders. I taped over gaps. I stuffed steel wool into holes around the pipes. I cleaned until the apartment smelled like bleach and nothing else. I took my trash out every night. I stopped leaving water in the sink. I stopped leaving food out. I stopped eating in the apartment. Still they came. I started noticing where they were coming from. The worst areas were the ceiling corners and the vents. I could hear movement above me at night. Not footsteps, but a faint rustling sound, like something alive shifting over a wide surface. Sometimes tiny bits of debris fell onto my counters, dark specks that smeared when I wiped them. I complained again. The manager finally admitted the problem was not just my unit. He said the upstairs apartment was the source. He said they would handle it. Nothing changed. Weeks passed. The heat got worse. The roaches multiplied. I woke up one night feeling something brush my cheek. I slapped at my face and crushed it without seeing it. When I turned on the light, there was a smear on my pillow and a broken body on the sheet. After that, sleep came in short bursts. I checked my bed before lying down. I shook out my clothes before putting them on. I stopped sitting on the couch. I stopped feeling safe anywhere inside those walls. I learned the truth by accident. I was carrying laundry up the stairs when the door to the upstairs unit was open. I did not look inside on purpose, but the smell hit me and pulled my eyes with it. It was thick and sweet and rotten. The floor was covered in a moving layer of insects. The walls were alive with them. They crawled over each other into cabinets along the ceiling. The place looked damp, dark, and abandoned even though people lived there. I backed away without making a sound. My hands shook so badly I dropped the laundry basket. Clothes spilled down the stairs, brushing against the wall where roaches clung in clusters. Later, the manager told me the tenants upstairs refused extermination. Their beliefs did not allow them to kill any living thing. He said they would not even allow traps. He said the building could not force them unless there was a direct health violation severe enough to involve the city. I felt trapped in a logic I could not escape. My apartment could be sprayed every week and it would not matter. The source was right above me, endless and protected. The infestation changed how the apartment felt. The walls no longer seemed solid. The ceiling felt thin, like skin stretched over something crawling. Every sound made my muscles tense. Every shadow on the floor made my heart jump. I stopped inviting people over. I stopped unpacking boxes. I lived out of sealed plastic bins. I washed my clothes at a laundromat and kept them bagged. I kept my toothbrush in the fridge. I wrapped my mattress in plastic and taped the seams. None of it stopped them. They came through the vents in waves. They poured out when the lights went off. Sometimes I woke to the sound of movement, a faint clicking and scratching that came from everywhere at once. I lay still, afraid that moving would bring attention. I developed rashes. I started coughing. I lost weight because eating felt risky. The apartment smelled no matter how much I cleaned. A sickly odor clung to the air, coming from above, seeping through the ceiling. One night, the power went out during a storm. The building went dark and silent except for rain and the soft sound of things moving. When I turned on my phone light, the floor was covered. They had filled the open space, crawling over each other, over my shoes, over the legs of the table. I stood on a chair until the power came back, my arms shaking from holding the light steady. That was the moment something inside me broke. I gave notice the next day. The manager tried to keep me, said they were working on it, said things would improve. I knew better. I packed what I could. I threw away more than I kept. Furniture, books, anything porous stayed behind. I sealed my clothes in bags and left them in the car for days in the heat. On my last night, I sat on the floor because the bed was already gone. The apartment was nearly empty. The roaches still came. They always came. I watched them crawl along the walls and disappear into cracks, patient and endless. I left at dawn. I did not look back. It took months before I stopped checking corners in new places. It took longer to sleep without light. Even now, years later, the smell of old buildings makes my stomach tighten. I learned how small choices by strangers can turn into daily terror. I learned how hopeless it feels to fight something that never stops coming, protected by rules that do not care who suffers beneath them. I never lived in another apartment under someone again. I never forgot that ceiling. I moved into the small suburban house in early spring, a two-story with faded siding and a narrow driveway that barely fit my car. The street was quiet, mostly older couples and a few families with young kids. The kind of place where you didn't expect anything unusual, the kind of place that promised ordinary, stable life. I thought it would be peaceful. The neighbors on the left had lived there for decades. I saw them once or twice, tending their lawn, waving from a distance, nothing more. The house on the right belonged to a family with 2 teenagers. At first, everything seemed normal. I noticed their routines from my own windows. The kids left for school at precise times. Their mother jogging past my yard in the mornings, headphones in, phone in hand. The father was never around in daylight, always gone before I left for work and home after dark. The first sign that something was off was subtle. A pile of trash in their front yard, bags torn open, scattered papers and food wrappers. It wasn't unusual for teenagers to be messy, but this pile stayed there for weeks, growing larger. I assumed the parents were overwhelmed, but the father was never visible, and the mother only briefly appeared in the evenings. Spring turned into early summer. The kids grew louder, not just normal teenage noise, but deliberate, chaotic. I watched one afternoon as they dragged furniture onto the driveway and spray-painted words and symbols on the side of their garage. They worked quickly, laughing, not noticing me peering from my window. I wanted to call someone, but I hesitated. It felt invasive, and I wasn't certain they were breaking the law. The neighborhood had seen worse. Then the vandalism crept into my own property. A few mornings later, I found a line of nails and shards of glass laid neatly across my driveway. The careful placement made it clear it wasn't accidental. I spent the better part of the day sweeping them into the trash and examining the surrounding yard, trying to figure out if it was a prank gone too far. The pieces didn't make sense. The kids weren't clumsy. They were deliberate. Over the next months, incidents escalated. A full can of soda smashed against my living room window one night, leaving sticky trails on the floor and windowsill. Dog waste appeared on my lawn, sometimes inside the small flower bed I tended near the porch. Graffiti appeared on my fence. Words scratched with a sharp object into the wood. The message was crude, targeted, but nothing identifiable that I could report. It felt like a challenge, a test to see how I would react. I started documenting everything, taking photos, marking dates. I even considered installing cameras, but the thought of constantly watching my neighbors made me uneasy. There was something unnatural about how calculated their actions felt. The father still never showed himself in daylight, and the mother's presence seemed to be diminishing. I rarely saw her outdoors anymore. One night, I woke to a noise in the yard, a scraping sound against the siding of my house. I stayed still, listening. The sound stopped. A few minutes later, it began again, closer this time, then moved away. I peered through the blinds and saw nothing, only shadows of trees shifting in the wind. Couldn't sleep. I kept a flashlight on the nightstand, imagining the worst, knowing the worst seemed to be coming whether I imagined it or not. It became a pattern. I would find evidence of their mischief almost daily. Trash thrown across my yard, scratches in the grass like something had been dragged, broken branches carefully placed along the walkway. It was unnerving how meticulous it was. They weren't careless. They weren't angry in the moment. They were precise. Each act was meant to send a message, and I had no way to decipher it. Winter arrived, and with it a brief lull in activity. Snow covered everything, muffling sound and hiding footprints. I hoped it was over, but then the first thaw revealed new evidence. My mailbox had been pulled off its post and placed in the middle of the yard. My tire tracks were smeared with mud, and tire chains had been used on the snow to drag something heavy across the driveway. The weight had left deep gouges in the asphalt. I began spending more time at home during the day, watching from windows, checking the driveway, measuring patterns in the disturbance of my property. I noticed that the incidents occurred mostly when I wasn't watching, always coordinated, always when the mother or father were absent. It became impossible to ignore the pattern. It wasn't random. It was planned, targeted, deliberate harassment. By late winter, the situation escalated further. One evening, I returned from work to find my front door ajar. Nothing inside had been taken, but the house had been searched. Drawers were left open, closets disturbed, my personal items moved. A note, small and folded, rested on the counter. It was a crude drawing, the meaning obscure, but the intent clear. Someone had been inside. Someone had invaded my home. I involved the authorities, reporting every incident, every pattern I had documented. The response was slow, frustrated by lack of evidence, the smallness of the neighborhood, and the subtlety of the harassment. Police visited the house several times, knocking, questioning, finding nothing directly implicating the kids. The adults remained distant, leaving the kids to manage their own chaos with little intervention. The breaking point came one evening when I found a line of sharp objects leading from the edge of my driveway to my back door. The precision of placement, the choice of materials, made it impossible to ignore. I called the police immediately, and they arrived within minutes. Investigation revealed the entire pattern of harassment, the careful escalation over months, and evidence linking the teenagers' activities to the acts on my property. The father was implicated indirectly, accused of neglect and enabling, while the mother admitted to having been aware but feeling powerless to intervene. Legal action was taken. The teens were ordered into juvenile detention for a period, and the adults faced charges for negligence and failure to supervise. The house was cleared, and I was able to restore my property, repair the damage, and finally feel safe again. The process was long and invasive, but it brought closure. I installed proper security systems, changed the locks, and spent weeks repairing not just physical damage but the sense of personal security that had been eroded. Living next to people who could plan and execute such persistent harassment left a permanent mark on me. I realized that ordinary life, even in a quiet suburban neighborhood, could conceal calculated chaos. It was the ordinary appearance, the predictability of daily routines, that had hidden the danger for so long. Once the pattern was broken and justice applied, life resumed, but I remained aware, cautious, attuned to small signals that had once gone unnoticed. I had learned the true meaning of proximity to harm, and it was an education I would carry with me forever. I moved into the house in late October, the kind of time when days feel short even at noon. The place was a narrow two-story rental on a quiet street where the trees leaned over the road and dropped leaves into the gutters until they clogged. Most of the houses looked similar, built in the same decade, patched and repainted by different owners over the years. It felt ordinary in a way that made me relax. I wanted ordinary. The neighbor to my right lived alone. I never learned his name. He was already there when I arrived, standing in his driveway with a leaf blower that wasn't turned on, just holding it and staring at the ground. He was tall and thin, wore the same dark jacket every day, and never looked up when I unloaded boxes. I remember noticing how still he was, not relaxed, just fixed in place. The first few weeks passed quietly. I worked from home and kept odd hours, so I noticed patterns. The neighbor's porch light stayed on all night. Every night. It was bright enough to cast a pale square onto my bedroom wall through the side window. I thought about closing the curtains but didn't. I liked knowing where the light came from. His trash cans stayed on the curb even when it wasn't trash day. They were always full, lids warped and never fully closed. Sometimes black bags were stacked beside them, tight and shiny, sitting there for days. No smell carried over even in warmer afternoons, which struck me as strange but not alarming. Plenty of people ignored trash schedules. What bothered me more was the timing of his movements. He never left during the day. I never saw a car pull out of his driveway, but around 3 or 4 in the morning, I would hear the side gate creak open, slow and careful, followed by the sound of footsteps on gravel. I sleep lightly. Each time it happened, I would check the clock and listen until the sound stopped. It always ended with the soft thud of the gate closing. At first I assumed he worked nights. The idea fit well enough. I tried not to focus on it. As the weeks went on, the small details stacked up. His windows were always covered from the inside, not with curtains but with something stiff and uneven. Cardboard, maybe. Nothing moved behind them. No light ever shone through. Even the porch light was mounted high, casting downward only. One afternoon, while raking leaves in my yard, I noticed the fence between our properties had been altered. A section near the back had been replaced with newer wood that didn't match the rest. The boards were thicker and set closer together. The work was rough, nails driven too deep, edges splintered. On my side, the ground along that section had been disturbed, soil darker and compacted, like it had been tamped down. I told myself fences rot. Repairs happen. Winter came early that year. Frost stayed on the grass well into the morning. One day I noticed footprints leading from his side gate across his yard, then stopping abruptly near the fence line. They didn't continue on my side. The next day, after a light snowfall, there were no footprints at all, despite the gate having clearly been used. The snow there was compressed smooth, as if brushed away. I stopped sleeping well. I found myself listening for sounds instead of drifting off. When the gate creaked, my heart rate jumped. I started keeping a small flashlight on my nightstand, not for any clear reason, just because it felt necessary. The smell started in December. It wasn't constant. Came in waves, sharp and sour, then gone. It seemed to rise from the ground rather than drift on the air. I checked my basement, my drains, my trash. Everything was clean. When I stepped outside, the smell grew stronger near the fence. On his side, it vanished, like the cold swallowed it. I considered calling the city about the trash cans. I even looked up the number. I didn't call. I didn't want attention. I didn't want to be wrong. One morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. A rented mini excavator sat in his driveway. No company logo, just a plain yellow machine. It stayed there all day. I watched from my window as he worked along the fence line, digging narrow trenches and filling them back in. He moved slowly, methodical, stopping often to measure with a short length of wood. By evening, the machine was gone. The ground looked smooth again, almost too smooth. That night, the porch light flickered for the first time. It dimmed, brightened, then steadied. I stared at it until my eyes burned. The turning point came in January during a power outage. A winter storm knocked out electricity across the neighborhood. The street went dark, silent except for wind pushing through bare branches. My house cooled quickly. I sat wrapped in a blanket, checking my phone for updates. Across the yard, his porch light stayed on. Shouldn't have. There was no generator sound, no hum, just that steady white glow. It cast longer shadows now that everything else was black. At around 4 in the morning, I saw movement near the fence. Without the usual ambient light, the darkness felt deeper, heavier. I pressed my face to the window. A shape moved on his side, then paused. I saw him clearly for the first time. His jacket unzipped despite the cold, hands bare and red. He stood facing the fence, head tilted as if listening. Then he stepped closer and placed his palm flat against the boards. I pulled back from the window and locked my bedroom door. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, the power returned. I called in sick and drove around the block, parking where I could see his house from a distance. A city utility truck was parked in front. 2 workers stood near the porch, looking uncomfortable. One held a clipboard, the other covered his nose. I didn't approach. I sat in my car until a police cruiser arrived. Then another, then an unmarked van. By evening, the street was taped off. I stood with the other neighbors at the far end, all of us quiet, watching. They carried things out of his house in sealed containers. They dug along the fence line. The ground was opened in sections, careful and precise. The smell hit then, undeniable and heavy, rolling through the cold air. People stepped back, some gagged. I stayed rooted in place, staring at the exposed earth that I had walked beside for months. Later, an officer came by asking questions. I told everything I had noticed. The light, the trash, the timing. My voice stayed steady, but my hands shook. In the weeks that followed, the full explanation came out through official reports and news articles. He had been using his property to store human remains taken from illegal burial sites tied to a long-running scam involving fake funeral services. Families paid for cremation or burial that never happened. The bodies were hidden, moved, reburied, shifted again to avoid detection. My neighbor wasn't the mastermind, just the caretaker. The night work, the trenches, the sealed bags, it all fit together cleanly once the truth was laid out. They found several bodies along the fence, some less than 3 feet from where my garden hose lay coiled. Others were inside the house, beneath false flooring and behind reinforced walls. The cardboard on the windows wasn't for privacy. It was to block thermal imaging. He had chosen the house because of its position, because one side bordered someone who kept to themselves and worked from home. Someone predictable. I moved out as soon as my lease allowed. Even now, months later, I still wake at night expecting to hear the gate creak. I still picture that porch light burning against the dark. There was no mystery left, no unanswered question, but that made it worse. Everything I had sensed had been real. Nothing had been imagined. I had lived beside a place where terrible, ordinary work was done patiently and quietly, and the only thing separating me from it was a thin line of wood and dirt. The apartment looked fine when we toured it. Neutral carpet, clean walls, no smell. It sat above a row of garages and shared walls on both sides. The rent fit our budget. We signed a 6-month lease because we were cautious, telling ourselves it was temporary. We had no idea how much that decision would end up saving us. The first week felt normal. We unpacked slowly. We slept in the bedroom. We cooked simple meals. Nothing seemed wrong. Then I noticed small red marks on my ankles. I assumed mosquitoes. It was summer. I ignored it. The marks came back the next morning. More of them. Small clusters, itchy in a way that felt deep under the skin. I changed sheets and washed everything. The next night, the itching woke me from sleep. I turned on the lamp and saw nothing on the sheets. I checked the mattress seams. Nothing moved. I went back to sleep uneasy. Within days, the bites spread up my legs and onto my arms. My partner had them too. We searched online and the word flea kept coming up. I felt embarrassed even thinking it. We did not have pets. We were clean. Fleas belonged to dirty places, to neglected animals. That thought stuck with me longer than it should have. We bought traps and sprays. We vacuumed daily. We washed everything in hot water. The bites did not stop. We started sleeping on the couch because the bedroom felt worse. The couch was newer, less fabric, easier to monitor. We wore long sleeves and socks even in the heat. We avoided scratching because the marks looked bad and we did not want anyone to see them. We stopped having people over. We made excuses. The fleas became visible after that. Tiny dark specks that jumped when light hit them. I saw them on the baseboards. I saw them on the couch cushions. I saw them crawl across white socks. The sight of one made my stomach drop every time. We called pest control. Then we called another. Then another. Each visit cost money we did not have. They sprayed. They fogged. They laid powders. They told us to leave for hours. We followed every instruction. We threw away rugs. We sealed clothes in bags. We vacuumed until the motor burned out. Nothing changed. The bites got worse. They formed lines. They swelled. Some became infected. I slept in a hoodie with the hood pulled tight around my face. I tucked my pants into socks and wrapped tape around my ankles. I still woke up scratching. The apartment stopped feeling like shelter. Felt like exposure. The walls felt thin. The floors felt alive. I could sit still and feel crawling that might not even be there. The sensation stayed even when nothing touched me. My skin never felt calm. One pest worker spent more time than the others. He checked places they never looked. He lifted outlet covers. He pressed along seams where the carpet met the wall. His expression changed as he worked. He moved slower, more careful. I watched his eyes instead of his hands. He explained without saying much. The infestation was old, long before us. The fleas were likely in the walls, in the subfloor, in places spray could not reach. They had hosts before and would find them again. There was no fast fix, no guarantee. Waiting out the lease was the only realistic option. That knowledge settled on us like weight. We stopped hoping. We focused on survival. We stopped using the bedroom completely. We sealed the door and stacked boxes against it. The couch became our bed. We covered it in plastic and sheets that we washed constantly. Our days revolved around containment. Shoes stayed in bins. Clothes stayed bagged. We changed outfits like we were entering a contaminated space because we were. Money drained away. Thousands went to treatments that did nothing. Each charge felt worse than the last. We skipped meals. We delayed bills. We told ourselves it would end soon. The worst part was the shame. We hid the bites. We avoided doctors. We avoided mirrors. I felt dirty even after showering. I scrubbed my skin raw. I checked myself constantly. I felt watched by something too small to see. Sleep came in fragments. I woke to phantom itching. I woke to real bites. I woke exhausted. The days blurred. The calendar moved slowly. Every mark of time was measured in bites and washes and failed treatments. When the lease finally ended, we did not hesitate. We did not negotiate. We did not argue. We packed what little we trusted and left everything else. The couch, the mattress, the clothes we loved. Furniture that once made the place feel like home stayed behind. We moved into an RV because it was all we could afford. Felt like a gamble. A small space on wheels instead of walls we could not control. But the first night inside it, something changed. The air felt still. The floor felt solid. I slept without long sleeves for the first time in months. No bites came. Days passed. Then weeks. The itching faded. The marks healed. We started to relax. The RV felt safe. Manageable. What was meant to be temporary became a choice. We stayed 2 years because peace is addictive when you have lived without it. Now we plan to buy a house. A place with no shared walls. A place where the problems are visible and solvable. I will never live in an apartment again. That experience carved something permanent into how I see shelter. We survived that place by leaving it behind completely. The cost was high, but staying would have taken more. The fleas did not just bite our skin. They changed how we trust spaces, how we rest, how we feel safe. The RV gave us that back. I will always choose control over convenience, because I know what happens when you lose it. The night I proposed was supposed to be simple and quiet. Nothing dramatic. No crowd. Just the two of us back home, still riding the soft shock of it. Hands touching more than usual. The ring catching light every time she moved. We were tired in a good way, the kind that comes after something important finally happens. We sat on the couch with a lamp on low and opened the laptop to call her parents. The house felt warm and sealed off from the outside, like the world had narrowed to one room. We were mid-call, smiling too much, when the screaming started. At first it sounded distant, like a radio left on somewhere. Then it sharpened. A high, broken sound that cut through the walls and pressed into the room. Came from next door. A woman's voice, raw and panicked, screaming words that came apart under the strain. It was not playful. It was not drunk yelling. It was fear stripped bare. The sound went straight through my chest. My wife's face changed instantly. The laptop sat open, her parents frozen on the screen, smiling expressions collapsing into confusion. The screaming got louder, closer, like the windows were not there at all. It came in waves, then turned into a continuous cry that did not pause long enough to breathe. I stood up without thinking. My hands were shaking. The scream held a shape that my mind kept trying to define. Pain, terror, something wrong enough that it could not be ignored. It was unclear what was happening, and that made it worse. The words were just enough to suggest something violent without confirming it. The not knowing filled in every gap with the worst possibilities. We ended the call abruptly. The room felt colder after. The lamp light seemed weak. The screaming continued. It echoed off the houses and bounced back, filling the street. I stepped outside and felt the sound hit me full force, vibrating in my ears. Other lights turned on up and down the block. Doors opened and shut. I called the police. My voice sounded thin and distant even to me. I stayed outside until the sirens came, then retreated back inside. The screaming eventually stopped, cut off sharply, leaving a silence that rang louder than the noise had. The night never settled back into calm. Even after the lights went out again, the air felt disturbed, like something had torn through it and left a mark. That should have been the end of it. A single bad night tied to a good one. An ugly stain on an otherwise perfect memory. It was not. The house next door had kids. Teenagers. Old enough to know better, young enough to feel untouchable. Their situation was complicated. Rules shifted often. Sometimes they were watched closely. Sometimes they were left to drift. Their energy spilled outward and found strange directions. Winter brought the next incident. Snow came heavy that year, piling up fast and clean. Our yard stayed smooth and untouched, a white sheet under the sky. The kids next door were stuck inside. Their yard was flat. No hill, no run, nothing to do. For days, we heard thumping and sliding sounds from their house, muffled but constant. It sounded like furniture moving, then something wetter, heavier. Then the water started. Not outside, inside their house. It seeped out under their front door and spread across the walkway. Dark patches formed on the snow, sinking fast. Steam rose faintly in the cold air. I stood at our window watching it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Later, we learned what they had done. They carried snow inside, armfuls of it, loads packed tight. They piled it at the top of the staircase leading to the second floor. They turned the stairs into a hill. Meltwater soaked into the wood, ran down into the walls, pooled in places it should never reach. The house groaned under the damage. Floors warped, drywall swelled. The cold crept deep into the structure. For weeks after, their house smelled damp and rotten. The sound of fans ran day and night. Contractors came and went. The kids laughed on the porch like nothing had happened. The idea that they could hollow out a house from the inside out just to slide downstairs stuck with me. It felt careless in a way that bordered on cruel. Time passed. The neighborhood settled into a tense routine. We learned to watch without staring, to listen without reacting. The house next door became something we tracked by sound and light rather than sight. When it was quiet, we relaxed. When it wasn't, we braced. The fire came later. I smelled it before I saw it. A sharp, dry scent that did not belong to cooking or fireplaces. I stepped outside and saw smoke lifting from behind their house, thin at first, then thickening. It rolled upward in uneven pulses. Orange light flickered at the edges. They had an outbuilding in the backyard, big enough to matter, built solid, old wood darkened by years of weather. It stood close enough to worry me, too close for comfort. Flames licked along one side, climbing fast. Heat warped the air above it. Someone called the fire department. Trucks arrived fast, lights cutting through the dusk. Water slammed into the structure, hissing and steaming. The fire fought back longer than it should have. By the time it was out, the building was ruined. Charred beams, collapsed sections, a blackened shell still standing out of stubbornness rather than strength. There was an investigation. Tape, clipboards, long looks exchanged between officials. No clear answer ever surfaced. Accident or boredom, carelessness or curiosity. The truth stayed buried under ash. Years have passed since then. The burned building still stands. It leans slightly now, roof sagging, boards split and gray. It never got torn down. It never got fixed. It sits there as a reminder of how close things came to being much worse. Life moved on around it. We got married. We built routines. The house next door quieted with time. The kids aged out of chaos or carried it elsewhere. The screaming never returned. The fires did not repeat, but the feeling stayed. Even now, when I walk past that burned structure, I smell smoke that is no longer there. When winter comes, I think about snow melting where it should never be. When I remember my proposal, the memory carries a sharp edge where the screaming cut through it. Nothing supernatural ever happened. No shadows moved on their own. No voices whispered. What haunted us was simpler than that. Unchecked recklessness, noise without care, damage done for the sake of impulse. The fear came from knowing how thin the line is between celebration and disaster. How easily someone else's chaos can spill into your life and rewrite a moment forever. The night I asked her to marry me is still one of the best nights of my life. It is also tied, forever, to the sound of a stranger screaming in the dark and the knowledge that safety can vanish without warning, even when everything feels right. This happened not long after the broken window, during a stretch of nights when sleep came in short pieces and every sound carried weight. The house felt different after that window shattered. Thinner, like the walls had learned they could be breached. We double-checked locks without talking about it. We left lights on longer than usual. Even the quiet felt unstable. That night started calm. No parties, no shouting. The street was still. Winter air pressed against the house and made small ticking sounds as the siding cooled. We had just fallen asleep when the first thump hit. It was not loud enough to be an accident. It was heavy and solid, like something thrown with intent. The sound came from the side of the house closest to the neighbors. It hit low near the foundation, a dull impact that traveled through the wall and into the floor. I sat up immediately. My heart was already racing before the second thump landed. That one came higher, closer to the window line. The spacing between them felt deliberate. Not random, not wind, not an animal. My wife was awake too. I could hear her breathing change in the dark. We lay still for a few seconds, listening. The silence stretched just long enough to make doubt creep in. Then another thump hit, followed by a scraping sound, like something dragging briefly along the siding before dropping away. I felt cold spread across my back. The memory of glass exploding inward came back sharp and clear. I imagined something heavier this time. A rock, a brick, something aimed. I did not look out the window. I stayed low and reached for my phone. My hands shook enough that I had to steady them against my leg. I called the police without hesitation. There was no discussion, no weighing options. The fear had passed the point of patience. While we waited, the thumps stopped. That was worse. The silence felt staged, like someone had stepped back to watch and listen. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark outline of the wall, waiting for the next hit. The police arrived quickly. Flashing lights washed across the bedroom ceiling in red and blue pulses. I watched from a narrow gap in the curtain as they walked next door instead of coming to us first. That alone told me how familiar this situation already was to them. I could not hear what was said. I could only see shapes moving inside the neighbor's house, shadows crossing windows, bodies shifting in that tense way people do when they are lying and hoping it holds. The officers stayed for a while, longer than I expected. Then they left. The lights disappeared down the street, and the dark rushed back in to fill the space. No one came to our door. The house felt wrong after that. Too quiet, too still. The sense of being watched crept back in, stronger than before. I checked the outside in the morning. There were marks on the siding, dull smears and hardened spots that caught the light at the wrong angle. I did not touch them. I already knew what they were. Sleep did not return that night or the next. Every sound outside made me tense. A car door closing felt like a threat. Wind brushing the house made my stomach drop. The side of the house nearest them felt exposed, like a blind spot I could not protect. The next afternoon, the mother came over. I saw her walking up the driveway through the front window. Her posture was tight, shoulders drawn in, steps slow. She looked smaller than usual, worn down by something heavier than embarrassment. I stepped outside to meet her. The air between us felt thick and uncomfortable. She did not stay long. She did not linger. Her face held a mix of shame and exhaustion that told me the truth before the details landed. She admitted what had happened without being pushed. She admitted that she had lied to the police the night before. She admitted that the kids had been outside. She admitted she had found what they used laid out openly on her kitchen table. Corn syrup, flour, an empty box of condoms. The words sat heavy in the air, not because they were surprising, but because they confirmed what I already knew. The proof had been sitting there while the police were being told a different story. The protection came automatically, without thought for what it cost anyone else. She apologized in the way people do when apologies are all they have left to offer. Quiet, careful, avoiding eye contact. I nodded, not because it fixed anything, but because there was nothing else to do in that moment. When she left, I went to the side of the house. The mess had hardened overnight. Corn syrup mixed with flour had turned into a thick paste that clung to the siding like glue. It had dried unevenly, pulling tight in some spots, cracking in others. The shapes were ugly and random. Smears where it had slid downward. Thick clumps where it had burst and stuck. The smell was faint but wrong, sweet and stale. I tried water first. It did nothing. The mixture laughed at it, held firm. I tried scraping with a plastic tool. It barely made a dent. The stuff had fused to the surface. I ended up using a chisel. The metal edge bit into the dried mess with a sharp sound that echoed down the side of the house. Each strike sent a jolt up my arm. Small chunks broke free and fell to the ground, shattering into dusty pieces. Took time. Hours. My hands cramped. My shoulders burned. The sun moved across the sky while I worked. As I chipped it away, anger settled into a steady, cold shape inside me. Not explosive, not loud, just solid. The kind that keeps you moving long after your body wants to stop. Every strike of the chisel felt like erasing evidence of someone else's disregard. The siding beneath was scarred. Not deeply, but enough to show where something had happened. It would need repainting. It would never look untouched again. By the time I finished, the ground was littered with broken pieces and white dust. I swept it up and bagged it. I washed my hands twice and still felt sticky. The side of the house looked cleaner, but the feeling did not lift. That night, I stood in the bedroom and looked at the wall where the thumps had landed. I tried to imagine the kids standing there in the dark, throwing things, laughing, knowing they would be protected if caught. I tried to imagine the mother finding the supplies on her table and deciding what mattered more in that moment. What haunted me was not the mess. It was the lie, the ease of it, the way it slipped out and closed the door on accountability. The knowledge that the truth only surfaced because guilt finally outweighed convenience. After that, trust did not return. Even when things were quiet, even when weeks passed without incident, the sense of threat lingered. We learned that night that noise could stop and danger could still remain. That damage could be hidden just long enough to get away with it. The house still stands. The siding still holds faint scars if you know where to look. The chisel sits in the garage, cleaned and sharp, a tool I never expected to use for something like that. The fear did not come from the thumps alone. It came from realizing how easily the truth could be buried, and how close we were to being hurt while someone else stood between it and consequences. The night ended quietly, but it left a mark that stayed long after the sound faded. This happened in the middle of a normal weekday, during a lunch break that was supposed to last 30 minutes. The kind of day where nothing feels sharp yet, where the air inside the apartment still smells like the morning coffee, and the street noise outside is steady and dull. I was home because my job is close enough to eat at my own table. My wife was there too, working on her laptop near the sliding door that opens to our porch. The porch is small. Concrete floor, thin railing, one drain near the corner that never works right. It sits directly under the upstairs neighbor's balcony. We had noticed the smell for weeks. It came and went, strongest in the afternoons, heavier when the sun warmed the concrete. It was a sour smell, sharp and stale, the kind that stuck to your nose even after you went back inside. We had cleaned our porch more than once, thinking maybe something spilled or a bird died somewhere we could not see. The smell always came back. The neighbor upstairs had always been a problem. Loud footsteps late at night, trash bags left outside his door, a dog that barked for hours. The dog stayed on the balcony a lot. We would hear it pacing, nails clicking on concrete, sometimes whining, sometimes silent in a way that felt worse. We never saw him walk the dog. We never saw water bowls or shade. Just the dog, the balcony, and the smell drifting down. That day, I was standing in the kitchen when I heard water pouring. Not the soft splash of rain, not a distant hose. It sounded close, heavy, steady, like someone dumping buckets without stopping. It came from above us, from the direction of the porch. The sound carried through the open window and echoed off the walls. I stepped toward the sliding door and stopped before opening it. The smell hit first, stronger than usual, wet and rotten. I slid the door open and saw water streaming down from the cracks in the balcony above. It was not clear. It was yellow-brown, thick in places, thin in others, streaking down the concrete wall and dripping onto our porch floor. It pooled near the corner, spreading outward in slow lines. The water left marks where it ran, dark trails, specks of debris, bits of hair clung to the wet surface. The smell grew stronger with every second. It filled my chest and made my stomach tighten. I stood there watching it fall, trying to understand what I was seeing, trying to convince myself it was something else. It was not rain. It was not dirty mop water. It was waste. I stepped outside and felt droplets land on my arm. They were warm. That detail stuck with me. Warm water falling from above in the middle of the day. I wiped my arm on my shirt and felt the fabric stick. I took pictures with my phone. Close ones, wide ones, shots of the water still dripping, shots of the stains left behind. I wanted proof because the smell alone had already taught me how easy it was to dismiss something you could not see. The camera captured the color better than my eyes did. It looked worse on the screen. The water stopped after a few minutes. The sound faded. The dripping slowed until only an occasional drop fell from the cracks above. The porch looked like it had been coated in grime. The air felt heavy, trapped, like the smell had nowhere to go. My wife came outside and stood beside me. She did not step forward. She covered her nose with her sleeve and leaned back against the doorframe. Her face tightened in a way I had only seen when she was trying not to panic. She took pictures too. We both knew this was no accident. A few minutes later, we heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, fast steps. The neighbor came down. His presence filled the small space before we even saw him. The smell clung to him, mixed with sweat and damp concrete. He stood too close. His posture was defensive, shoulders forward, arms stiff. His face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes scanning our porch like he was looking for a way out. There was no denial in his body, no confusion. He looked annoyed, not surprised. He gestured toward the balcony above, toward the dog, toward the drain on our porch. His movements were sharp and scattered, like he was throwing reasons into the air and hoping one would stick. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. He glanced at my phone. He glanced at my wife. He glanced back up at his balcony. I felt a cold focus settle in. My heart was beating fast, but my thoughts were clear. This was not about the smell anymore. This was about someone who thought our space did not matter. Someone who believed gravity made his problems disappear. He eventually went back upstairs. The footsteps faded. The door above slammed. The dog began pacing again. Nails on concrete. Slow, restless steps. We stood on our porch and looked at the mess. The water had soaked into the concrete, leaving dark stains that would not fade. The smell clung to everything. The railing, the door frame, the chair we kept out there. It felt like the porch was no longer ours. It felt contaminated. I went inside and washed my arms twice. The smell lingered on my skin. I could taste it in the back of my throat. I changed my shirt and still felt unclean. My lunch sat untouched on the table, cooling, forgotten. I emailed the apartment office. I attached the pictures. I described the history, the dog, the smell, the water. I kept my words plain and factual. I did not exaggerate. I did not insult. I let the images speak for themselves. When I hit send, I felt a small sense of control return. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. Every sound from above made me tense. Every drip from our porch drain made me think the water had started again. The smell stayed, stubborn and sharp. We opened windows. We lit candles. Nothing fully covered it. As the sun lowered, the stains on the porch became more visible. The light caught them at an angle that showed every streak and patch. It looked like something had been spilled and left to rot. I went out with a bucket, gloves, and cleaner. I scrubbed until my arms burned. The water I poured out turned the same yellow-brown before draining away. The smell lifted slightly but never left. That night, the dog stayed quiet. The upstairs balcony was dark. No movement, no water. I slept lightly, waking at every sound, expecting another rush of liquid, another invasion from above. The next morning, the apartment office replied. They acknowledged the issue. They confirmed receipt of the photos. They stated that this behavior violated building rules and health codes. They stated that the neighbor had been contacted and warned. They stated that further incidents would result in fines and possible eviction. Later that day, maintenance came. They inspected our porch. They documented the stains. They cleaned the underside of the balcony above. They applied a sealant to reduce seepage. They spoke quietly with us, professional and serious. They did not downplay anything. The smell faded over the next few days. Not all at once. Slowly. Each morning it was weaker. Each evening it lingered less. The porch returned to a place we could stand without flinching. The neighbor avoided us after that. No more water. No more waste dripping down. The dog appeared on the balcony less often. When it did, it had a bowl. It had shade. The pacing stopped. What stayed with me was not the smell or the stains. It was the moment I realized how fragile shared spaces are. How easily someone else's neglect can spill into your life. How close comfort sits to violation. That afternoon stripped away the illusion that walls and floors fully separate us. It reminded me that sometimes horror is not loud or sudden. Sometimes it drips down slowly, stains what you thought was safe, and forces you to confront it head-on to make it stop.